Payments Podcast from Bottomline Technologies.
The introduction of the cheque in the 17th century was a striking act of creativity because it fundamentally changed the way businesses could pay and get paid. Fast forward to today, how are cheques still being used and what differences can we observe between the new and old approach to this payment method? Hello, I'm Rich Williams, host of the Payments Podcast, and to discuss the evolution of the cheque, I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Scarborough, Commercial Product Manager at Bottomline. Hi Andrew and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Rich.
So let's jump straight into it, Andrew. Now, with BACS, faster payments, and consumer banking so popular nowadays, what role does the humble cheque play in the UK payments landscape?
Well, the number of checks cleared in 2019 was about 270 million. So the number of checks issued is declining, and it declines at about 15% per year. But if you think about it, that's still 1 million checks per working day. For many companies and customers, checks remain a convenient way of making a payment when you don't have the pay's bank account details or if they don't want to share them with you.
So I still get one cheque a year from my gran on my birthday, and I think that's probably common for many of us.
Yeah, that's a great example where checks are still used. Many of the elder generation aren't comfortable with internet or mobile banking and prefer to use paper. Some of them don't even have PCs or electronic devices. So, and that applies both to the payments they make and the payments they receive as well. You'll also find that for some people, they prefer a check as it gives them more flexibility than a payment directly into their bank account.
So moving away from consumers then, what about companies? What's their approach to cheques?
Well, it's difficult to say, but my estimate is about half the checks issued every year are from companies as opposed to consumers. Quite often, consumers are ahead of corporates in many cases. For a number of reasons, companies have to make large scale payments, and checks can be a very convenient way of paying, especially, for example, if it's to a lot of people in a short period of time. So you'll see, for example, quite a lot in the press about large refund programs at the moment, and companies using checks to make those payments.
So for a business using a cheque payment method, they get to hold on to their cash for longer. Is that the case?
So certainly that may have been the case in the past, but that's not true any longer. Check clearing times have been reduced now. In fact, a check is cleared faster than a standard BACS payment. I think many companies would prefer to have a more accurate view of their cash position rather than wait for checks to be presented by their customers and cleared through the banks.
Well, that's really surprising to hear that a cheque can clear quicker than a BACS payment. I'm sure that'd be news to many of the listeners. It certainly is to me. So how have these cheque clearing times been reduced, Andrew?
So to make the process more efficient for the banks, they launched a new system called image clearing in 2018. The general consensus was that checks are going to be with us for a while longer, so let's modernize the system like they have done in other countries. And because a lot of paper has been removed from the system, the checks that are presented on day one will be cleared by the next working day.
Now, I've heard of something called cheque image clearing. How exactly does that work?
Well, instead of the paper actually being sent to the clearing companies and the banks, an image of the check is now submitted to the payer's bank. So the image is created either by a bank themselves when someone takes the paper to the bank, by companies, especially companies who are receiving lots of checks every day, and also consumers. And then it's the image that's read by the clearing system who recommend a pay or no pay decision to the paying bank.
So applying that to a real life scenario, as I used earlier, Andrew, what's the easiest way for me to cash my grand's cheque?
Well, most banks now support remote deposit for checks, meaning that you can scan your check with your mobile banking application and your camera, and then submit that to your bank, who will then forward it on to the paying bank. Actually, that's quite a neat feature given the problems people be having taking checks to the bank recently over the last 3 months in lockdown.
Something which is becoming more and more relevant these days, and people are having greater awareness of it, is the security of a financial transaction. So, is this method of clearing for checks using images secure?
That's a great question, Rich. If you're familiar with any kind of paper document, even cash, there are many security features that help prevent fraudsters from either producing counterfeit documents or even trying to alter the details on a real document. So if you think of cash or checks or even tickets and vouchers, they're often printed on watermark paper, they have holograms, security inks, a range of different features. Now, the problem with these features is now that the images are being taken of a feature, there's less opportunity for someone to physically inspect the check when it's cleared. If you think of your remote deposit, you're not actually sending the paper to your bank, you're sending an image of the paper. And the fraudsters, I think, have worked this out and are looking for ways to take advantage of it. All you really need is a check and a graphics program, and you can become a fraudster. Now, it's no coincidence, but since image clearing was launched, check fraud has actually now gone up for the first time in 10 years. So the banks had got a handle of checks and fraud, but now it's started to come up again.
So, with that being said, Andrew, what can a company do to protect their cash in the form of a check?
So to combat fraud, the main clearing banks are now starting to quite heavily promote a new feature called an image survivable feature. And it's a little bit like a digital signature for a check. It's designed to survive the process of turning paper into a company image. And what you do is the signature, or this digital signature, is generated by encrypting the data that you can see on the check. That's the check number, sort code, bank account number, pay name, date, and amount. And it's then printed in the form of a string of text or a QR code. And when the banks read and receive the images, they then check this feature to make sure that all the data matches the details that are on the check.
So, how easy is it if I'm a fraudster and I want to recreate the check with this new feature?
Well, to do that, you'd need to both know the algorithm and the encryption keys that are used when you hash this data to create your image survivable feature. Now, as you can imagine, both the technique and the algorithm and the encryption keys are really, really closely guarded and also nigh on impossible to reverse engineer. So, really, really difficult for fraudsters.
One would assume then, Andrew, that the banks would be keen for their customers to adopt this method.
You're absolutely right. Most checkbooks now already come with an ISF printed onto the check. So, if you look at your grand's check, Rich, you might notice that little string of text on the face of the check. And if you're printing your own checks, what we call special checks, then soon the banks will start to mandate that you need to apply this image survivable feature at the point when you print the check. But my personal feelings is you shouldn't wait for the letter from your bank. Whilst the bank still has liability for any check fraud, and that might change in the future, it's not great to be the target of fraudsters. And it could take you a while to recover any funds that you lose through check fraud. So as soon as you have the ISF, the fraudsters likely to move their focus onto other easier targets, such as checks that don't have the feature on.
So, assuming that I'm a business that's still producing and printing my own checks, where would I go to find this new feature?
Well, that's good. So if you're printing your own checks, I would always start with your software supplier first. They're the ones who help create the paper checks, and they're responsible for taking your data and printing onto the check. So I'd start with them. But if you're handwriting checks and you're buying checkbooks, then I would be asking the stationery supplier, the people who are supplying those checkbooks to you. And that could be a company or it could be your bank.
Great. And I suppose finally, and flying in the face somewhat of this conversation about checks, what could I do if I wanted to stop printing checks altogether?
That's a good question. And there's been several initiatives around the world to digitize checks. In North America, for example, this is called e-checks. So as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, checks are really convenient because you don't need the bank account details of the person you're trying to pay. But if you think about an electronic payment, a BACS payment, faster payment, then that's got many benefits for companies. It's cheaper, it's faster, you don't need all of the special kit that goes with cheques, and you also don't have to wait for the pay to actually present and cash the cheque in. So, as well as providing both cheques and outsourced printing services, Bottomline provides also a solution that helps organizations transition from a paper cheque to a digital payment, and that's called PTX refunds. And I'd really think if you're now thinking, how can I remove my dependency on cheques once and for all, I would strongly suggest looking into that. We're having many companies come to us asking that very question.
Fantastic. So I'd like to think that I have a new appreciation, and perhaps our listeners do as well, of all the hard work that's done behind the scenes when we receive cheques. So that leaves me just to say thanks again for joining us today, Andrew, and I hope you'll join us again some point very soon.
Thanks, Rich.
So unfortunately, that's all we have time for today, but in the meantime, you can listen to more episodes on all things payments at the touch of a button using your preferred provider. And we'll see you all next time.
Payments Podcast from Bottomline Technologies.